Tonight the shield failed in the only way people remember. A ballistic missile got through into Petah Tikva. Northern Israel was hit again. And the question that should scare everyone. Brutally simple. If the threat is supposed to be shrinking, why does the war still know exactly where to hit to make an entire country feel exposed? One Iranian missile got through into Petah Tikva and left a strike site big enough to rewrite the mood of the entire night. The second that impact happens inside a city block, this stops being a story about systems working in theory and turns into a story about who was still reachable in reality. At least 3 people were reported killed when a missile struck a residential building in Petah Tikva. That is the hard payoff of the title right up front. Not a near miss, not a clean interception, but a direct hit where civilians live. Northern Israel was hit again in another rocket salvo, even when one early report said no injuries were found in that round. That still matters because the title is not about one city suffering alone. It is about pressure spreading across the map at and the same time. If you want this channel to hit the nerve instead of wasting your time with padded war talk, subscribe now and drop this in the comments before we go any further. If the enemy is being degraded, why is a ballistic missile still getting through into Petah Tikva while northern Israel is getting hit again? Because that is the real center of the story. Not whether defenses work at all, because clearly they do. Not whether launches are lower than the biggest waves, because they probably are. The real story is that none of that changes what people feel when one missile gets through anyway. And once that happens, the entire public conversation changes. It stops being about the percentage of missiles that were stopped and becomes about the one that made it into a residential city and the second front of fear that keeps the North from breathing easy. That is why this title pulls so hard. Ballistic missile gets through is not just technical language, it is a psychological breach. Petah Tikva tells people this is not some distant military zone or an empty patch of land. Northern Israel hit again tells them the pressure is not isolated. Put all 3 together and the audience instantly understands what is at stake. This is a story about a shield that is strong but not closed, and a war that may be thinning in volume without losing its ability to terrify. The interception claim is over 90%. But the same assessment says roughly 40 missiles have still evaded defenses and caused at least 20 deaths. That is exactly why high success rates do not calm civilians the way officials want them to. Because people do not live inside the 90% that worked. They live inside the night. Their own block did not get saved. That is the first harsh truth here. A missile shield does not have to fail everywhere to feel like it failed. It only has to fail in the few places that burn themselves into national memory. One apartment block, one crater, one night of emergency lights, one stretch of road where families suddenly realized the alert they heard was not going to end like the last one. That is how confidence gets hit. Not by a statistical collapse, but by a few visible penetrations that make every reassurance sound incomplete. And that is why the audience clicking this title wants more than a recap. They are not just asking what happened, they are asking whether something changed. Whether the war has entered a phase where fewer launches can still produce enough successful hits to keep an entire country tense. Whether the idea of safety has started slipping even while military messaging says the threat is being pushed back. That is the tension inside the title. And it is exactly why Petah Tikva matters far beyond a single impact point. One line tied the damage to cluster munitions hitting vehicles and buildings, which changes the way people hear the word intercepted. The fear stops being only about one blast point and becomes fear of spread, fragments, secondary damage, and danger that feels wider than a single impact marker on a map. That detail is explosive in public imagination. The moment people hear cluster munitions, they do not think like weapons analysts. They think mess. They think unpredictable spread. They think the safe path outside may not feel safe. The damage picture may not stay contained. And the all-clear may not emotionally register as all-clear. Even before every fact is settled, the idea itself makes the strike feel dirtier, more invasive, and harder to mentally box in as a one-off. And that feeds the central fear perfectly. Because now the audience is not only thinking, how did a missile get through? They are also thinking, what exactly got through? Was this just a leak in the shield? Or was it the kind of leak that creates multiple layers of anxiety after impact? That is how a single event gains extra mass. It is no longer just about the initial explosion. It is about what kind of danger people think may now be in the streets, the buildings, the debris, the aftermath. One battlefield assessment put it at around 20 missiles over 24 hours, with one hitting Petah Tikva and at least 2 warheads carrying cluster munitions. That is a smaller number than the giant barrages people imagine. And that is exactly what makes it so dangerous, because it suggests a thinner barrage can still produce unforgettable results. This is the second harsh truth. Smaller salvos can create a false sense of comfort on paper. People hear 20 and think that sounds better than 100. Militarily, maybe it is. Emotionally, maybe not at all. If a reduced barrage still lands the right strike in the right city on the right night, the public can experience it as just as destabilizing. Or worse. Fear is not measured only by quantity. It is measured by whether the next alert could still end with your neighborhood filling every feed, every group chat, every emergency call. And once you understand that, the whole title becomes clearer. The story is not simply that missiles were fired. The story is that a war can get narrower in one sense and more intimate in another. Fewer launches, but sharper consequences. Smaller volume, but better timing. Less saturation maybe, but enough reach to remind everyone that the shield is not absolute and the map is not settled. That is the kind of contradiction audiences feel instantly, even if they cannot explain it in military language. Haifa also enters this picture through damage at a residential site hit by an Iranian missile. That matters because once multiple cities can show real residential damage, the public stops processing this as a single city nightmare and starts processing it as a countrywide test of whether normal life can still be protected. This is where northern Israel hit again stops being a supporting detail and becomes one of the engines of the title. The North does not need to carry the biggest death toll every single time to matter. It only needs to stay alive as a zone of repeat pressure. Repeat sirens. Repeat disruption. Repeat proof that people cannot fully unclench. And that repetition is powerful because it blocks the one thing governments, under fire, desperately need to restore, which is routine. Routine is everything in a war like this. The second people start believing daily life is mostly back, leadership gains breathing room. The second the North lights up again, while Petah Tikva is dealing with a missile that got through, that breathing room tightens. The public does not split those things into separate boxes. They fuse them into one feeling. The war is still reaching more than one part of the country, and nobody gets to relax yet. At the impact site, the story was already down at the level that actually decides how people remember a war. The dead, the wreckage, the building, and the people who had to live through the hit. That matters because the conflict only feels strategic until the camera reaches the block where somebody was sleeping. Somebody ran for shelter. And somebody did not come back out. That is the human anchor right there. Forget the maps for a second. Forget the strike graphics, the defense diagrams, the talk about launchers and attrition. Picture the family in Petah Tikva hearing the alert and moving on instinct. Somebody grabs a phone. Somebody is half awake. Somebody believes this will end like many other alerts ended, loud and frightening but survivable. Then it does not. Then the missile gets through. Then a city becomes the face of the breach. That is why a YouTube audience clicks on this title. Because they know instinctively that war becomes real at the exact second the abstraction dies. The second it is not a barrage anymore, but a residential building. Not a wave of fire, but 3 people killed. Not pressure in the North, but families hearing another alert and realizing the story is still active there too. People do not come for this title just to hear military jargon. They come because they want the moment translated into human stakes they can feel. Petah Tikva was not only dealing with a residential shock around the strike story, it was also dealing with damaged industrial buildings. That matters because a missile, hitting that kind of mixed, urban seam, does more than injure people. It rips through the machinery of ordinary life where work, movement, storage, homes, and emergency access all overlap. That kind of impact zone matters more than people think. A missile does not just break concrete. It breaks sequence. Morning sequence. School sequence. Work sequence. Family sequence. Which roads stay open? Which workers do not show up? Which parents keep kids home? Which buildings get checked again? Which rumors outrun verified facts? That is why one successful hit can feel much bigger than its blast radius. It attacks confidence in routine itself, and once routine starts taking damage, the public mood shifts fast. A city like Petah Tikva is not being experienced as a sterile battlefield coordinate. It is being experienced as somewhere people expected the layers of defense to hold. So when a missile lands there, the public does not hear it as a random event. They hear it as a message. Not a message in the propaganda sense, a message in the emotional sense. It tells them that mostly safe is not the same as safe. One report framed the barrage around Passover timing and described it as the largest ballistic missile salvo on Passover. That timing matters because holiday attacks do not only interrupt infrastructure, they break into family, time, ritual time, and the small protected bubble people desperately want to believe can still exist during war. Timing is one of the most underrated weapons in a conflict like this. A strike on a random weekday is terrifying. A strike tied to a holiday lands deeper. It contaminates memory. It fuses fear to the table, the room, the call from relatives. The moment people thought for a second they might have a few hours of emotional normalcy. And once war enters memory like that, it becomes much harder for official messaging to dominate the mood. Because people are no longer responding only to facts, they're responding to what the war felt like, inside their own home. This is why I keep coming back to the title's hidden core. It is not only about a missile slipping through. It is about a country being reminded that the war still has timing, reach, and imagination. It can still hit the center with a headline strike. It can still keep the North active enough to block relaxation. It can still force people to carry two contradictory thoughts at once. The enemy is under pressure, and the enemy can still scare us tonight. That contradiction is politically brutal. It eats confidence from the inside. And that is the information war layer nobody should ignore. One side wants the headline to be degradation. Launchers hit, stocks reduced, barrages thinner, momentum shifting. The other side wants the headline to be persistence. We can still reach you. We can still puncture the shield. We can still make your civilians feel us. The nasty part is that both stories can contain enough truth to survive. And when both survive at the same time, the public starts trusting neither completely. That is why a strike like Petah Tikva matters beyond the physical damage. It puts the official story under live fire. If you keep telling people the threat is shrinking, then every successful penetration becomes more politically expensive. Not because your larger argument is automatically false, but because visible exceptions are what the public remembers. One ballistic missile in the wrong city at the wrong time can do more damage to trust than dozens intercepted over empty space can do to repair it. And northern Israel being hit again multiplies that damage. Because now the government cannot easily isolate Petah Tikva as a single traumatic leak. The north keeps the pressure distributed. It keeps the map emotionally open. It keeps the public from sealing the event off in their heads and saying, terrible, but over. Instead, the message becomes, terrible, and maybe not over at all. That is how repeat alerts function as a weapon even, without a catastrophic casualty count every time. They keep the body tense. They keep the mind waiting for the next one. So what is the honest answer to the question this title raises? It is not that the entire defense picture has collapsed. That would be lazy and false. It is not that reduced missile volume means the threat is gone. That would be comforting and false. The honest answer is nastier than both. The defense network can still be highly effective overall, and the war can still produce enough successful, visible breaches to keep national anxiety high. Iran may not need huge salvos every night if it can still prove reach. Israel may be narrowing the threat without being able to erase it fast enough for civilians to feel the improvement. That is the real pressure point now, not just what is destroyed, but what people believe. Do they believe tomorrow will be safer than today? Do they believe the next alert will probably end without a residential hit? Do they believe the North is calming down, or just pausing between rounds? Do they believe Petah Tikva was a freak exception, or the kind of exception that keeps coming back until it starts to feel like a pattern? Those are the questions that decide endurance, and no military spokesman gets to answer them alone. So when people click on breaking, ballistic missile gets through at Petah Tikva, northern Israel hit again. What they really want is the truth behind the adrenaline. Here it is. The title works because it captures a phase of war where fewer missiles can still cause maximum psychological damage, where one city in the center and repeat alerts in the north combine into a single national feeling, and where the public is being asked to trust a trend that the night itself keeps complicating. That is why this story hits so hard. Not because the shield vanished, because it did not. Because it mostly holds, and still not enough to stop the moments that matter most. And that is the scariest version of all. Not total failure, selective failure, not constant catastrophe, intermittent catastrophe. Not a war that is obviously spiraling everywhere at once, but a war that knows how to stay alive with exactly the right amount of shock, enough to keep fear circulating, enough to keep the map emotionally unstable, enough to make every "we are making progress" line sound incomplete the second another city lights up. If you made it this far, then you already know this was never just a missile story. It was a confidence story. So tell me in the comments, plainly, is Petah Tikva a painful but limited breach, or proof that this phase of the war can stay politically and psychologically dangerous even with smaller barrages? Subscribe if you want the next one. Sharp, immediate, and without the fake drama layered on top of real danger. Stay sharp, stay skeptical, and I will see you in the next one.